Long ago, in the valley of Elah, the Israelites stood face to face with their enemies, the Philistines. But before the armies engaged each other in battle, there was a challenge from the Philistines to have a single warrior from the Israelites engage their greatest champion, Goliath. The description of Goliath given in 1 Samuel makes him an intimidating figure, to say the least. According to the description given in the scriptures, Goliath's height was 6 cubits in a span. Converted into modern measurements, that would mean that Goliath was 9.5 feet tall. The record also goes on at length to describe Goliath's equipment. He wore a bronze helmet that weighed about 30 pounds, wore a coat of armor that weighed about 150 pounds, and was armed with a spear whose shaft weighed 15 pounds and a spear point that weighed another 15 pounds. He also had a sword whose dimensions are not given, but that David later described by saying, "There is none like it." So not only was Goliath big, but to carry all that equipment into battle, he must have been overwhelmingly strong as well. This wasn't a tall, skinny guy. This was a giant. Some scholars believe that Goliath may have been descended from the giants described earlier in the book of Genesis, or the giants that frightened the Israelites when they first came into the promised land. All this combined to make Goliath an overwhelmingly intimidating figure on the battlefield. So who would challenge Goliath? The natural choice would have been Saul, the king of the Israelites, who the record says stood taller than any of the people. But Saul showed no desire to confront Goliath, and instead he stayed in his tent for 40 days, while Goliath came onto the field regularly to mock the Israelites for their cowardice. Entering into this picture came David, a young shepherd. David wasn't even part of the Israelite army at this point. He was just taking some food to his 3 older brothers who were in the army. During his visit, David witnessed one of the daily mocking sessions Goliath engaged in with the Israelites. David's first response to Goliath's taunting tells us a lot about his faith. Rather than marveling at the size, strength, or armaments of Goliath, David instead said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" To David, the deciding factor in a battle with Goliath was not his height, his strength, or his weapons. It was his covenants. David believed that he had made covenants with the living God, so there was no way an Israelite could fall in combat to a Philistine who hadn't made the same covenants. David was so furious that anyone would even allow a Philistine to mock God that he went directly to King Saul and volunteered to fight Goliath. Saul tried to persuade David not to fight, but David was set on his course and showed his trust in God, telling Saul, "The Lord delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, and he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said unto David, "Go, and the Lord be with thee." You and I know the end of the story. Goliath wasn't as invisible as he first appeared. Some scholars have even speculated that Goliath's size was the result of an overactive pituitary gland that would have given Goliath a defect in his skeletal structure that might have made him particularly vulnerable to a rock thrown from a sling. From our perspective, the outcome seems inevitable. For David, too, the outcome seemed inevitable, but not because of any of the reasons we cite today. He just believed that if God was on his side, there was no way he could fail. In our lives, we often face insurmountable problems, challenges that seem as intimidating as Goliath must have seemed to the Israelites. But if we have faith, the way through these problems can become clear. The stage was already set for Goliath's defeat. All that was needed was an Israelite willing to step onto the stage and play the role God intended. David had the courage to go into combat with Goliath, knowing the Lord was by his side. It can take courage in the battles of our own life to step onto the stage and play the role the Lord needs us to play. But if we have faith like David, the way for our success has already been prepared. David had courage that came from his covenants. If we can find the same kind of courage from our covenants, we can find the courage and the faith to face the Goliaths that confront us in our own lives.